She lowered her eyes when the Duke called her a servant. 3 months later, the king introduced her as his future queen. The entire ballroom went silent before she understood why. 1 second earlier, she had been smiling. The next, hundreds of eyes were fixed on her, with the same expression people wore when witnessing something they knew should never have happened. Crystal chandeliers flooded the hall with golden light. Violins drifted through the air. Nobles laughed behind jeweled masks. Servants carried silver trays through the crowd. Everything looked beautiful. Everything looked perfect. And standing at the center of it all was a young woman named Eleanor Hart. She had spent 3 hours preparing for this evening. 3 hours convincing herself she belonged here. 3 hours trying to believe the invitation in her hand meant something. She did not know that before the night ended, the man she trusted most would destroy that belief with a single sentence. The Duke was walking toward her. Every conversation near the ballroom entrance began to fade. Women lowered their fans. Men glanced over their shoulders. The Duke of Blackthorne rarely crossed a crowded room without reason, and tonight he was walking directly toward Eleanor. Her pulse quickened. For one foolish moment, she allowed herself to hope. Perhaps he wanted the first dance. Perhaps he wanted to introduce her properly. Perhaps all those quiet conversations they had shared over the past year meant something after all. The Duke stopped only a few feet away. His dark coat gleamed beneath the chandeliers. His sharp features remained unreadable. People were already watching, waiting, expecting. Then a wealthy countess stepped beside him. The woman smiled politely. "Your Grace," she said, "you seem to know everyone worth knowing in this room. Won't you introduce us?" The Duke glanced at Eleanor. Only once. Then he answered, "I suppose." A strange feeling settled inside her chest. Small, cold, dangerous. The Countess waited. Several nearby guests leaned closer. Eleanor noticed none of them. She was focused entirely on the Duke. On the man whose letters she had saved. On the man who always seemed kind when no one else was watching. On the man who had once promised she would never need to face society alone. His mouth opened, and he said the words that would follow her for years. I'm not going to tell you what he said just yet, because the worst part wasn't the sentence. It was what happened to Eleanor after she heard it. The way her smile disappeared, the way her hands tightened around her gown, the way she stood there, trying not to break while hundreds of people watched. Tell me something. If the person you trusted most humiliated you in front of an entire room full of strangers, would you forgive them? Tell me your answer below, and tell me which country you're watching from tonight, because I read every comment. And if you enjoy emotional royal romance stories filled with betrayal, secrets, revenge, and powerful payoffs, subscribe now, because this story is only getting started. The Duke glanced at Eleanor, only once. Then he answered, "She is only a servant's daughter." The ballroom did not explode with laughter. That would have been easier. Instead, silence spread through the crowd. A slow silence, a cruel silence. The kind that forces every person to sit with what they just heard. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Not because the statement was true. Her father had indeed worked as a servant before his death, but because of how he said it, not as a fact, as a dismissal, as a warning, as a way of telling everyone present that she did not belong among them. Someone laughed softly. Someone else whispered. The Countess raised an eyebrow. The Duke looked away, and in that moment, Eleanor realized something terrible. He knew exactly what he was doing. Her fingers tightened around her gown. Her throat burned. Every instinct told her to run. Every instinct told her to disappear. Instead, she lowered her eyes. Not because she agreed with him, because she could no longer bear looking at the faces around her. The whispers started immediately, like rain striking glass. Quiet, relentless, painful. A servant's daughter? I wondered who she was. How embarrassing. What was she thinking? The Duke said nothing. He simply turned away, as though she had already stopped existing, as though the damage had already been done. Because it had. Eleanor stood motionless, while the crowd slowly returned to their conversations. The orchestra resumed playing. The dancers returned to the floor. The world continued moving, but something inside her remained frozen. She finally turned and walked away. No dramatic exit, no tears, no scene, just quiet footsteps carrying her toward the nearest corridor. The farther she moved from the ballroom, the harder it became to breathe. Her vision blurred. The humiliation she had fought so hard to contain began breaking through the cracks. She reached an empty balcony overlooking the palace gardens. Cold air struck her face. Only then did she allow herself to exhale. Her hands trembled. She hated that they trembled. She hated that he still had the power to hurt her. Most of all, she hated that part of her still wanted an explanation. Footsteps approached behind her. She did not turn. She already knew who it was. Miss Hart. His voice sounded cautious, almost guilty. Almost. Eleanor stared into the darkness beyond the gardens. "What do you want?" The Duke stepped closer. "I need to explain." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Explain what?" "Eleanor, no." She finally turned. For the first time that night, he saw the damage clearly. Not tears, not anger, disappointment, far worse than either. "You don't get to use my name after what you just did." His jaw tightened. "You misunderstand." "Do I?" The Duke hesitated. That hesitation told her everything. He had expected forgiveness. He had expected understanding. He had expected her to wait patiently while he justified humiliating her before hundreds of people. Instead, she simply looked tired. The kind of tiredness that comes from having your last illusion shattered. "My mother was watching." The excuse sounded weak, even before he finished speaking. Eleanor stared at him. Then she laughed again. Not because it was funny, because she could hardly believe what she was hearing. "So your solution was to destroy me first?" It wasn't supposed to happen like that, but it did. Neither spoke. The distance between them suddenly felt enormous. Finally, Eleanor stepped past him. "I'm leaving." "Eleanor, wait." She stopped, not because she wanted to, because she wanted him to hear her answer. "If tonight taught me anything, Your Grace, it's that I should have listened when people warned me about believing in fairy tales." Then she walked away. This time, he did not follow. The carriage ride home felt endless. Rain struck the roof in steady rhythms. The city lights disappeared one by one. Eleanor sat alone, replaying the moment again and again. She hated herself for doing it, yet she could not stop. Every word felt sharper now, every whisper louder, every glance crueler. When she finally arrived home, the small cottage looked exactly as it always had. Simple, quiet, safe. Her aunt opened the door before she could knock. One look at Eleanor's face told her everything. Oh, child, that was all it took. The tears finally came. Not dramatic sobs, not hysteria, just silent tears sliding down her cheeks while her aunt held her. Sometimes pain arrived loudly, sometimes it arrived quietly. This was the quiet kind. The kind that settled deep inside your chest, the kind that stayed. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Duke Adrian Blackthorne stood alone in his study. The celebration continued below. Music echoed through distant halls. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, yet he heard none of it. All he could see was Eleanor's face. Not her tears, not her humiliation. Her disappointment, the look that said she had expected better from him, the look that said he had become exactly the man she feared he was. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. His mother stepped inside. The Duchess Helena Blackthorne, a woman whose approval mattered more to society than the approval of half the kingdom. "You handled that well." Adrian stared at her. "What?" The girl, his stomach tightened. "Handled what well?" The Duchess crossed the room calmly, ending the rumors before they became a problem. Something cold moved through Adrian. For the first time, he realized exactly what had happened. His mother thought he had humiliated Eleanor intentionally. Worse, she approved. "You planned this." The Duchess smiled faintly. "No," but the answer came too quickly. too smoothly, too perfectly. Adrian suddenly remembered something. The invitation. The unexpected invitation. His mother's insistence that Eleanor attend. The carefully arranged conversations throughout the evening. The timing. The audience. The Countess. Every piece suddenly clicked together. His mother had built the stage. He had delivered the final line. The realization hit him like a hammer. Eleanor was never the target. No. Then what was? The Duchess met his eyes. Your future. Adrian felt a chill move through him, because he knew exactly what she meant. Marriage, status, power, politics. The things noble families valued above everything else, including people, especially people. You used her. The Duchess remained silent. That silence was answer enough. For the first time in years, anger flared inside Adrian. Real anger. Not irritation, not frustration. Anger. Because regardless of what his mother believed, Eleanor was not a pawn. She was not a problem. She was not an obstacle. She was the only person who had ever spoken to him without caring about his title, and he had just helped destroy her. Miles away, Eleanor sat beside a small window in her bedroom. The rain continued falling. Most of the candles had burned low. Sleep refused to come. She reached into her purse. A folded letter rested inside, one of Adrian's old letters. She stared at it for a long time. Then she walked to the fireplace. The flames flickered softly, warm, hungry, patient. She dropped the letter into the fire. The paper curled almost instantly. The ink blackened. The words disappeared, one by one, until nothing remained. Eleanor watched the ashes drift upward. Then she whispered 4 words that would change everything. I deserve something better. What she did not know was that someone else had heard the Duke's cruel introduction. Someone powerful, someone dangerous, someone who had spent years searching for a particular name, Eleanor Hart. And as the kingdom slept, that man unfolded an old document. His eyes settled on a signature he had not seen in nearly 20 years. Charles Hart, Eleanor's father. The man's expression hardened. Because if the document was genuine, then the servant's daughter humiliated at the royal ball was not a servant's daughter at all. She was the rightful heir to a fortune someone had stolen long ago. And very soon, the entire kingdom would learn the truth. The next morning, Eleanor Hart woke with swollen eyes and a decision already made. She would never attend another royal gathering, never answer another letter from Duke Adrian Blackthorne, never again place her dignity in the hands of people who treated kindness like a weakness. The decision should have brought peace. Instead, it brought emptiness, the kind that settles quietly after a dream dies. Outside her bedroom window, the village carried on as usual. Merchants opened shops. Children chased one another through muddy streets. Farmers guided wagons toward the market square. The world had not stopped because her heart was broken. The world rarely stopped for anyone. Eleanor dressed simply and joined her aunt downstairs. Harriet Hart was already preparing breakfast. She glanced up as Eleanor entered. You slept? Not much. Harriet nodded. That answer did not surprise her. Neither woman mentioned the ball. Neither woman needed to. The silence between them already carried enough understanding. Halfway through breakfast, someone knocked at the front door. 3 sharp knocks, unfamiliar, unexpected. Harriet frowned. Visitors rarely came this early. She opened the door. A tall man stood outside. His coat was expensive, his posture military. Silver streaks ran through dark hair at his temples. Most striking were his eyes, sharp, observant. The eyes of someone accustomed to uncovering secrets. Good morning, he said politely. My name is Victor Ashford. Neither woman recognized the name. I apologize for arriving unannounced. I was hoping to speak with Miss Eleanor Hart. Eleanor exchanged a glance with her aunt. A strange feeling moved through her chest. The man looked familiar somehow. Not because she had met him before, because he reminded her of someone she could not quite place. Harriet remained cautious. What is this regarding? Victor's expression softened. Her father. The room fell silent. Charles Hart had been dead for 10 years. Very few people still spoke his name. Eleanor slowly stood. What about my father? Victor reached into his coat and removed a weathered leather folder. He placed it carefully on the table. Then he said 6 words that changed everything. Your father wasn't who you think. The silence deepened. Eleanor stared at him. What does that mean? Victor sat down slowly, choosing his words with care. Before Charles Hart became a servant, he was a businessman. Eleanor frowned. I know that. No. Victor shook his head. You know part of the story. He opened the folder. Inside were aged documents, contracts, letters, financial records, all decades old, all bearing her father's signature. Victor slid one paper across the table. Eleanor picked it up. At first, it meant nothing. Then her eyes widened. The amount written near the bottom was staggering. Far more money than her family had ever possessed. Far more money than a servant could earn in several lifetimes. This can't be real. It is. Victor leaned forward. 20 years ago, your father helped build one of the most successful shipping companies in the kingdom. Eleanor stared at him. You're mistaken. I'm not. He produced another document, then another, then another. Each one told the same story. A story Eleanor had never heard. A story someone had worked very hard to bury. My father never mentioned any of this. Victor's expression darkened. Because he lost everything. Harriet slowly lowered herself into a chair. She looked suddenly older. Much older, Eleanor noticed. Aunt Harriet? The older woman remained silent. Victor noticed her reaction immediately. You knew. Harriet closed her eyes. Only briefly, but long enough. Long enough for Eleanor to understand. You knew. Harriet looked at her niece sadly. I knew pieces of it. The room seemed smaller now. The air heavier. What pieces? Harriet took a shaky breath. Your father asked me never to tell you. Tell me what? Tears gathered in Harriet's eyes. The people who destroyed his business were powerful. Victor finished the sentence. Powerful enough to erase records. Powerful enough to buy silence. Powerful enough to ruin anyone who challenged them. Eleanor felt cold, very cold. Who? Neither answered immediately. That frightened her more than any answer could. Finally Victor spoke. The Blackthorne family. The words landed like a physical blow. Eleanor blinked, certain she had misheard. The Duke's family? Victor nodded. The current Duchess? No. Eleanor stood abruptly. That's impossible. I wish it were. Victor opened another document. This one contained signatures, official seals, financial transfers. Every line pointed toward one conclusion. The Blackthorne estate had profited directly from her father's collapse. The room began spinning, not because of the money, not because of the betrayal, because suddenly every moment at the ball felt different. The humiliation, the introduction, the cruelty, the dismissal. None of it felt accidental anymore. A terrible possibility emerged. What if Adrian knew? Victor's face softened. I don't believe he did. That answer should have comforted her. It didn't, because if Adrian had known, he was cruel. If he hadn't known, he was weak. Neither option changed what happened. Meanwhile, 50 miles away, Adrian Blackthorne had not slept. Not truly. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Eleanor standing alone beneath the chandeliers. He saw her lowered gaze. He heard the whispers. Most of all, he heard his own voice. Only a servant's daughter. The sentence echoed endlessly. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. Frederick Lawson stepped inside. One of Adrian's oldest friends. One of the few people willing to speak honestly to him. Frederick took one look at Adrian and sighed. You look terrible. I feel worse. I expected that. Frederick closed the door behind him, then sat across from the Duke. Let's begin with the obvious. Adrian rubbed his forehead. I know. No. Frederick leaned forward. You don't. Adrian frowned. What are you talking about? Frederick dropped a folded newspaper onto the desk. The headline was impossible to miss. Duke publicly humiliates young woman at royal ball. Adrian felt his stomach sink. It gets worse. Frederick pointed toward another article. Rumors, speculation, gossip. The story had already spread across the kingdom. Everyone had an opinion. Very few were favorable. Adrian closed his eyes. Wonderful. No, Frederick's voice hardened. Not wonderful. Dangerous. That word got Adrian's attention. Dangerous how? Frederick hesitated, then spoke carefully. People aren't talking about Eleanor. They're talking about your character. Adrian looked up. Frederick continued. You spent years building a reputation for fairness. One sentence destroyed half of it. Silence followed, because both men knew it was true. Eventually, Adrian stood. I'm going to fix this. Frederick laughed. Not kindly, not cruelly, realistically. How? Adrian had no answer. That was the problem. Meanwhile, Eleanor spent the afternoon reviewing documents. The deeper she looked, the worse the story became. Her father had not failed. He had been betrayed. Investors withdrew unexpectedly. Contracts vanished. Loans were called in without warning. Competitors appeared almost overnight. Every setback traced back toward the same handful of powerful families. At the center stood one name, Blackthorne. Hours later, Eleanor sat alone in the garden, trying to process everything, trying to reconcile two versions of reality. The first version was simple. Her father had been unlucky. Life had been unfair. The second version was far darker. Someone had stolen her future before she was old enough to understand what was happening. Footsteps approached. Victor joined her. For several moments neither spoke. Then Eleanor finally asked the question haunting her all day. Why are you helping me? Victor looked toward the horizon. Because I owed your father my life. Eleanor turned toward him. Victor smiled faintly. Years ago, when everyone abandoned him, your father helped me. What happened? I was young. Victor chuckled softly. Foolish. I made mistakes. Big ones. His smile faded. Your father saved me from them. The silence returned, comfortable this time. Then Victor reached into his coat. He withdrew one final document. Unlike the others, this one carried a royal seal. Eleanor frowned. What is that? Victor's expression became serious. Something I was hoping wasn't real. A chill moved through Eleanor. Why? Victor handed her the paper. Because if it is real. His voice trailed off. Eleanor scanned the page. At first she understood nothing. Then her eyes reached the final paragraph. Her breath caught. No. Victor nodded slowly. That's what I said. The document described an inheritance. A massive inheritance. One that had never reached its intended heir. One that belonged to a bloodline thought extinct. One connected directly to Charles Hart. And by extension, to Eleanor. Her hands trembled. This says, I know. This can't be true. I spent 6 months verifying it. The garden suddenly felt silent. Too silent. Because if the document was genuine, Eleanor Hart was not merely the daughter of a servant. She was the last surviving heir to one of the wealthiest families in the kingdom. And someone had spent 20 years making sure nobody discovered it. Victor watched realization spread across her face. Then he delivered the final blow. The people who hid this secret know I found it. Eleanor looked up sharply. What? They've already started moving. Fear entered her voice. How do you know? Victor's expression darkened. Because someone followed me here. At that exact moment, a figure appeared beyond the garden gate. Watching. Waiting. Not moving. The stranger stood, only long enough to confirm he had been seen, then disappeared into the growing darkness. Victor slowly rose to his feet. For the first time since arriving, he looked genuinely concerned. Eleanor, what? You need to understand something. The seriousness in his voice made her stomach tighten. What? Victor stared toward the road where the stranger had vanished. Then he answered, Your father's enemies never intended for this secret to survive, and now they know you're alive. The following morning, the Duchess of Blackthorne received a letter that nearly slipped from her hands. That had never happened before. For 20 years, Helena Blackthorne had maintained absolute control over every crisis that threatened her family. Scandals, financial disasters, political rivals. She had survived them all. But this letter was different, because it contained a name she had spent 2 decades trying to bury: Charles Hart. The color drained from her face. The servant waiting nearby noticed immediately. "Your Grace?" Helena folded the letter. "Too quickly. Leave." The servant obeyed without question. The moment the door closed, Helena read the letter again, and again, and again. The contents never changed. Victor Ashford had reopened the Hart investigation. Records had been recovered, witnesses had been found, questions were being asked, questions that should never have existed. Helena lowered herself into a chair. For the first time in years, genuine fear touched her heart. Not fear for herself, fear for her son. If the truth emerged, Adrian would learn what she had done, everything she had done. Every lie, every manipulation, every ruined life. And she knew one thing with absolute certainty: her son would never forgive her. Meanwhile, several miles away, Eleanor could not stop staring at the inheritance documents. The numbers alone felt unreal. Entire estates, shipping routes, commercial properties, investments, generations of wealth, all connected to a bloodline she had never known existed. A bloodline connected to her father, the same father who spent his final years repairing boots for neighbors, simply to keep food on the table. The contradiction felt impossible. Why didn't he tell me? Victor stood near the window, watching the road carefully. "He was protecting you." Eleanor frowned. "From what?" Victor looked toward her. "From becoming a target." The answer settled heavily between them, because it made sense. Too much sense. If powerful people were willing to destroy Charles Hart over money, what would they do for an inheritance worth 10 times more? Harriet entered carrying tea. Her hands trembled slightly. Eleanor noticed. "Aunt Harriet," the older woman forced a smile. "I'm fine." Eleanor knew she wasn't. The past was reopening old wounds. Wounds Harriet had spent years trying to forget. Victor accepted a cup. Then his expression changed. Only slightly, but enough. Eleanor noticed immediately. "What is it?" Victor set down the tea. "The horse." "Oh, what horse?" "The one outside." Silence filled the room. Victor moved toward the window, slowly, carefully. Then his face hardened. "We have company." Eleanor's pulse quickened. She crossed the room. A black carriage stood across the road. No family crest, no markings, no explanation, just a carriage, waiting silently beneath gray morning skies. "Who are they?" Victor's answer came immediately. "Someone who doesn't want us reading those documents." The carriage remained motionless, watching, waiting, like a predator. Hours later, Adrian Blackthorne rode toward the Hart cottage. He knew Eleanor would not welcome him. He knew she might refuse to see him entirely. None of that mattered. He needed answers. Since the ball, one question had haunted him. Why had his mother seemed so satisfied? The humiliation itself made no sense, not unless there was something larger behind it, something he still couldn't see. His horse reached the village shortly before noon. Villagers noticed immediately. Some bowed, others whispered. A few turned away entirely. The newspaper stories had spread quickly. Adrian felt every stare, every judgment, every assumption. For perhaps the first time in his life, he understood what public humiliation felt like. It wasn't pleasant. By the time he reached the cottage gate, his stomach was tight. The front door opened before he could knock. Victor Ashford stepped outside. Both men froze. Recognition flashed instantly. "You." Victor's voice carried no warmth. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Victor Ashford. Years ago, Victor had been one of the kingdom's most respected investigators. Then he vanished. Now Adrian understood why. The realization arrived suddenly. "You've been looking into Charles Hart." Victor folded his arms. "And you've been protecting the people who destroyed him." "No," the The answer came instantly. Victor studied him, searching, measuring, judging. Eventually, he stepped aside. Eleanor will decide whether she speaks to you. Adrian entered cautiously. The atmosphere inside felt different, tense, guarded, dangerous. Then he saw the documents spread across the table, and everything changed. Charles Hart, financial records, property transfers, old contracts, names, dates, evidence. Enough evidence to destroy reputations, enough evidence to destroy entire families. Adrian's heart sank. What is all this? No one answered immediately. Finally, Eleanor spoke. And proof. Her voice remained calm, too calm, the kind of calm that exists after anger burns itself out. Proof of what? Eleanor met his gaze. That your family ruined mine. The words hit harder than any accusation. Because deep down, Adrian already feared they were true. He stepped toward the table, examining the documents, reading signatures. Following dates, the deeper he looked, the worse it became. Every trail led toward Blackthorne money, Blackthorne influence, Blackthorne decisions, his mother's decisions. The room fell silent. Finally, Adrian whispered, "No." Victor's expression remained grim. "I verified everything." Adrian grabbed another document, then another, then another. The evidence never changed. His mother had lied, not once, not twice, for decades, and the consequences sat directly in front of him. Eleanor, the woman he had humiliated, the woman whose family his own had already destroyed years before. The realization was almost unbearable. Eleanor? She looked away, not because she hated him. That would have been easier, because she no longer trusted him, and trust was much harder to rebuild than affection. Adrian closed his eyes. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Victor interrupted. "We have a bigger problem." Everyone turned toward him. Victor placed another document on the table. Unlike the others, this one looked newer, fresh. Recent, urgent. What is that? Victor's face darkened. A warning. Eleanor frowned. From who? Victor pointed toward the signature. Nobody recognized it, at least not initially. Then Adrian's expression changed, slowly, dangerously. "I know this symbol." Victor looked surprised. "You do?" Adrian nodded. "It's used by a private organization." "What organization?" Adrian hesitated, because even speaking the name felt dangerous. Finally he answered, "The Circle of 12. The room fell silent. Victor's eyes widened slightly. Harriet looked confused. Eleanor looked concerned. "What is that?" Adrian leaned against the table, trying to choose his words carefully. "The circle isn't officially real." "Meaning?" "It means powerful people deny it exists." Victor nodded grimly. "Because it does exist." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "What do they do?" Neither man answered immediately. That silence told her enough. Finally, Victor spoke. "They protect powerful interests." "How?" Victor laughed without humor. "Any way necessary." The answer chilled the room. Because everyone understood what it meant. Money, influence, threats, blackmail, disappearances. The inheritance was attracting attention, dangerous attention. And if the circle had become involved, the situation was already far worse than anyone realized. Outside, thunder rolled across distant hills. Dark clouds gathered overhead. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like a storm preparing to break. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside. Everyone jumped. Victor reached the window first. His face turned pale. "What happened?" Victor pointed. The answer stood in the garden, or rather, what remained of the garden. Several flower beds had been destroyed. A stone bench lay shattered, and embedded in the ground was a steel arrow, a message. Nothing more, nothing less. Victor rushed outside. Adrian followed. The arrow carried a folded piece of paper. Victor opened it carefully. His jaw tightened immediately. "What does it say?" Victor handed it to Adrian. The message contained only one sentence. "Stop digging, or the girl dies next." The silence that followed felt endless. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, the color drained from her face. Harriet gasped. Adrian crumpled the note in his fist. For the first time, genuine fear entered the situation. Not financial fear, not political fear, personal fear. Someone was willing to kill, not because of money, because of what Eleanor might discover. Adrian looked toward the road, his expression hardened. No, Victor glanced at him. No what? Adrian's voice became ice. No one threatens her. For the first time since arriving, Victor saw something unexpected. The Duke wasn't acting out of guilt anymore. He wasn't acting out of obligation. He wasn't acting out of duty. He was acting out of protection. Because somewhere between the humiliation, the regret, and the truth, Adrian had realized something. He was in love with Eleanor Hart, and now someone wanted her dead. The problem was that he still didn't know who, but elsewhere, hidden inside a grand estate miles away, another woman watched the storm gathering outside her window. Duchess Helena Blackthorne. A second letter had arrived. Its contents were brief, terrifyingly brief. The girl has the documents. We are taking action. Helena lowered the letter slowly. Her hands trembled, because she knew exactly who sent it. The Circle of 12. And unlike everyone else in the kingdom, she knew what happened when the Circle decided someone had become a problem. People disappeared, witnesses vanished, evidence burned, families were erased. Helena stared into the storm, then whispered 3 words she never thought she would say. We've gone too far. Outside, lightning split the sky, and far beyond the village, hidden among the trees overlooking Eleanor's cottage, a cloaked figure lowered a spyglass. The figure smiled, then mounted a horse and rode off to deliver a message. The target had been confirmed. The hunt had begun. The storm arrived just after midnight. Rain hammered the cottage roof. Wind rattled the windows. Lightning flashed across the countryside in brilliant white bursts. Inside, nobody slept. Not after the threat. Not after the arrow. Not after the realization that Eleanor's life had become the center of a dangerous game she never asked to join. Victor sat near the front window, with a loaded pistol resting beside him. Adrian remained by the fireplace. Harriet had finally fallen asleep in a chair. After exhaustion overcame fear, only Eleanor remained awake. She stood near the window, staring into darkness, watching the rain, watching the road, watching a life she no longer recognized. 3 weeks ago, she had been worrying about mending dresses and paying household expenses. Now powerful families were hunting her, ancient secrets were resurfacing, and a mysterious organization wanted her silenced. Nothing made sense anymore. You should try to rest. Adrian's voice came quietly from behind her. Eleanor didn't turn around. I'm not tired. That's a lie. A small smile almost appeared. Almost. Maybe. For several moments neither spoke. Rain continued falling. The silence felt different than before. Less hostile. Still cautious, but different. Finally, Eleanor looked at him. Did you know? Adrian frowned. Know what? About the inheritance? No. She studied him carefully, searching for deception, finding none. And your mother? The question landed heavily. Adrian looked away. I don't know anymore. That answer hurt, because it was honest. The woman who raised him suddenly felt like a stranger. The realization haunted him. Eleanor understood, more than she wanted to, because betrayal always hurt most when it came from someone you trusted. A sudden knock shattered the silence. Everyone froze. Victor immediately grabbed his pistol. Adrian moved toward the door. Another knock followed. 3 slow strikes. Deliberate, controlled. Not the knock of an attacker, not the knock of a friend. Something else. Victor opened the door cautiously. A young messenger stood outside, soaked from rain, terrified. I have a delivery. Victor accepted the sealed envelope. The messenger immediately left, practically running toward his horse. That alone was concerning. Victor closed the door, examined the seal. Then his expression darkened. What is it? Victor handed the letter to Adrian. The royal palace. Everyone stared. Adrian broke the seal. Read the contents, then read them again. His face slowly lost color. Eleanor stepped closer. What happened? Adrian looked up. My mother has requested an emergency audience. Victor frowned. With who? Adrian swallowed. All of us. The room fell silent. That made no sense. The Duchess hated public scrutiny. She avoided unnecessary attention. For her to request a meeting now, something serious had happened. Very serious. The following morning, 4 riders traveled toward Blackthorne Palace. Storm clouds still lingered overhead. The roads remained muddy. The mood was worse. Nobody spoke much. Everyone remained trapped inside their own thoughts, especially Adrian. The closer they came to the palace, the more uneasy he felt. His mother never surrendered control willingly. If she was asking for this meeting, circumstances must have become desperate. By noon, the palace emerged from the mist. Massive stone walls, towering gates, dozens of guards, everything looked exactly as it always had, yet somehow different, darker, as if the building itself sensed trouble approaching. The gates opened immediately. They had been expected. Servants escorted them through silent hallways. No welcoming committee, no ceremony, no formal greetings. Only tension. Finally, they reached the Duchess's private study. The doors opened. Helena Blackthorne stood waiting. One glance told Adrian something was wrong. His mother looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. The difference was startling. The woman who once commanded every room now appeared frightened. Eleanor noticed it too. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Helena surprised everyone. She walked directly toward Eleanor and bowed her head. The room froze. Victor blinked. Harriet gasped. Adrian looked genuinely shocked, because Helena Blackthorne bowed to no one, ever, yet she was doing it now. Eleanor Hart. Her voice trembled slightly. I owe you an apology. Silence consumed the room. Eleanor didn't know how to respond. Neither did anyone else. Eventually Helena continued. What happened to your father was wrong. The words seemed painful, like broken glass forced through her throat. But the truth is worse than you know. Victor stepped forward immediately. What truth? Helena closed her eyes. For several seconds she seemed to struggle with herself. Then she opened a drawer, removed an old leather journal, and placed it on the desk. This belonged to Charles Hart. The room stopped breathing. Eleanor stared at the journal. Her father's journal, the one that disappeared after his death, the one nobody had ever found. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Where did you get this? Helena's answer barely rose above a whisper. I stole it. Shock rippled through the room. Eleanor's heart hammered. Victor looked ready to explode. Adrian looked physically ill, but Helena wasn't finished. I stole it because Charles discovered something. The room fell silent again. What? Helena looked directly at Eleanor. He discovered the circle. Nobody moved, nobody blinked, nobody breathed. Victor slowly stepped forward. What did you say? Helena's expression hardened. The Circle of 12. The organization everyone thinks controls nothing. The organization that controls everything. Fear moved through the room. Real fear. The kind powerful truths create. Victor opened the journal carefully. His eyes raced across the pages, then stopped. His expression changed instantly. What? Victor looked up, pale, almost horrified. Charles documented everything. Eleanor felt dizzy. Everything? Victor nodded. Names. He turned another page. Meetings. Another page. Transactions. Another page. Political bribery. Another page. Disappearances. The room grew colder with every word. Because this wasn't merely corruption anymore. This was an empire. A hidden empire. Built on secrets. Built on power. Built on fear. Victor reached a specific page, then froze. His hands stopped moving. His breathing changed. Eleanor noticed immediately. What is it? Victor looked toward Helena, then toward Adrian, then back at the journal. Finally he spoke. The circle didn't destroy Charles because of the inheritance. The room went silent. Eleanor frowned. What do you mean? Victor swallowed. He wasn't their victim. The words felt impossible. Then what was he? Victor slowly closed the journal. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. He was investigating them. Nobody spoke. Nobody could. Because suddenly everything changed. Charles Hart wasn't merely a businessman. He wasn't merely a victim. He wasn't merely a ruined father. He had been fighting something much bigger, something dangerous enough to erase entire families. Victor continued reading, and the revelations became worse. Much worse. Charles had discovered financial fraud stretching across the kingdom. Judges receiving bribes, politicians receiving payments, business rivals disappearing after refusing cooperation. Everything traced back to the circle. Everything, including... Victor suddenly froze again. The room waited. His face turned white. What? Victor slowly looked toward Helena, then toward Adrian. Finally he whispered, "Oh my God." Eleanor's pulse quickened. What? Victor's voice barely worked. The Duke's father. Adrian's entire body stiffened. What about him? Victor stared at the page. He wasn't killed by bandits. The room exploded with silence. A silence so complete it felt physical. Adrian couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. His father died 20 years ago. Everyone knew the story. Bandits attacked his carriage. Nobody survived. It was tragic, simple, final, or so everyone believed. Victor looked directly at Adrian. Your father discovered the circle too. The words shattered everything. Adrian stumbled backward. No. Victor held up the journal. Charles wrote everything down. Helena sat heavily into a chair. Tears appeared in her eyes. For the first time, Eleanor realized something. Helena hadn't merely hidden the truth. She had been terrified of it. Terrified for decades. Victor continued. The circle murdered your father. Adrian felt his world collapse, because suddenly his mother's behavior made sense. The secrecy, the fear, the control, the desperate need to protect him. She wasn't protecting power, she was protecting her son, from the same people who killed her husband. Helena finally broke. Years of guilt exploded outward. They threatened him. Tears streamed down her face. They threatened Adrian. They threatened everyone. Her voice cracked. I thought if I cooperated. Nobody judged her. Nobody spoke. Because fear makes people do terrible things. Victor looked down at the journal again, then reached the final pages. His expression changed once more. This time not fear. Hope. What now? Victor slowly turned the journal around, showing everyone a hand-drawn map. An unfamiliar location had been circled repeatedly. What is that? Victor smiled grimly. Charles's insurance policy. Eleanor frowned. What does that mean? Victor tapped the map. Before he died, your father hid something. Everyone leaned closer. What? Victor looked directly at Eleanor. The evidence. The room froze. The real evidence. Not copies. Not notes. Not suspicions. Proof. Enough proof to destroy the circle forever. Enough proof to expose everyone. Enough proof to end decades of corruption. The map pointed toward one location. A forgotten estate, deep within the northern mountains. Abandoned for years, hidden from public records, unknown to nearly everyone. Victor's smile vanished, because another realization arrived. A dangerous realization. If Charles left a map, Eleanor understood immediately. Someone else knows about it. Victor nodded. And if the circle learns we're looking, nobody needed him to finish. Because everyone already knew. The hunt for the inheritance was over. The hunt for the evidence had begun. And whoever reached that hidden estate first would decide the fate of the entire kingdom. 3 days later, they left before sunrise. No servants, no royal escort, no official records, only 5 riders disappearing into the gray morning mist. Victor Ashford led the group. Adrian rode beside Eleanor. Harriet remained behind at Blackthorne Palace under heavy protection. The fewer people who knew about the journey, the better. At least that was the plan. The problem was that someone already knew. Someone always knew. The northern mountains rose like giants along the horizon, dark, ancient, silent. The hidden estate waited somewhere among those peaks. According to Charles Hart's journal, the evidence had remained untouched for nearly 20 years. If it was still there, if nobody had found it first, if they survived long enough to reach it. By midday, rain began falling, a cold, steady rain that turned roads into mud and made every mile feel twice as long. Eleanor pulled her cloak tighter. "You think we'll find it?" Victor glanced back. "I think Charles wanted it found. That's not the same thing." "No," Victor smiled faintly. "It isn't." Adrian watched Eleanor carefully. She looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. The past week had overturned her entire life. Her father wasn't who she thought he was. The Duke's family had helped destroy him. A secret organization wanted her dead, and now she was riding into the mountains, searching for evidence powerful enough to shake a kingdom. Most people would have collapsed under the pressure. Eleanor kept moving. That impressed Adrian more than he could explain. Late that afternoon, they stopped beside a river. The horses needed rest. So did the riders. Victor unfolded Charles's map across a fallen log. The estate should be here. He pointed toward a narrow valley. Adrian studied it. "The path looks abandoned." "It is." "Then how do we know we're going the right way?" Victor tapped a symbol near the edge of the map. "Your father included markers." Eleanor looked closer. Small symbols appeared throughout the route. A tree, a stone bridge, a waterfall. Each marked a direction. A guide left specifically for whoever eventually followed. "He planned this." Victor nodded. "Years before his death." The realization struck Eleanor. Her father knew he was in danger. He knew powerful people were hunting him. And despite all that, he still kept fighting, still gathered evidence, still protected the truth. Pride mixed with sadness. The feeling nearly broke her. Before she could speak, Adrian suddenly stood. His hand moved toward his sword. Immediately, without hesitation, Victor noticed too. "What is it?" Adrian stared into the forest, listening, watching. The others followed his gaze. At first, they saw nothing, then movement, very slight, branches shifting, leaves rustling. Someone was there, watching them. Victor slowly reached for his pistol. The forest fell silent, too silent, the kind of silence predators create. Then an arrow exploded from the trees. Adrian moved instantly. The arrow missed Eleanor by inches. Wood splintered behind her. Down. Chaos erupted. More arrows followed, one after another. Fast, precise, deadly. Victor fired toward the tree line. A scream answered, then silence. For one brief second, then the attackers charged. Black-cloaked figures emerged from the forest. 5, then 8, then 12. Too many, far too many. Adrian drew his sword. Steel flashed. The first attacker reached him. The fight lasted less than 2 seconds. The man hit the ground. The second attacker followed immediately. Victor fired again. Another figure collapsed. Eleanor scrambled behind a fallen tree. Her heart hammered. Everything happened too quickly. Shouting, steel, gunfire, rain, mud, blood. The world became a blur. One attacker broke through, charging directly toward her. Eleanor froze. The distance disappeared rapidly. 10 feet, 5 feet, 3. Then Adrian appeared. The clash echoed through the valley. The attacker crashed backward. Adrian stood between them, breathing hard, sword raised, protecting her. The realization hit Eleanor unexpectedly. He wasn't protecting an inheritance. He wasn't protecting evidence. He was protecting her. The thought lingered, even as the battle continued. Moments later, the surviving attackers retreated, vanishing into the forest as quickly as they arrived. Victor lowered his pistol. The valley grew quiet again, except for rain and heavy breathing. Adrian scanned the trees. "They'll be back." Victor nodded. "Which means we're getting closer." Nobody liked that answer, but everyone knew it was true. The circle wouldn't attack unless they feared what lay ahead. That meant Charles's evidence probably still existed, and that terrified them. By the second evening, the mountains surrounded them completely. The hidden estate appeared shortly before sunset. Even after 20 years, it was impressive. Massive stone walls, a grand manor, iron gates rusted by time. Nature had reclaimed much of it. Vines covered windows, trees grew through collapsed courtyards, yet the estate remained standing, waiting, like a forgotten guardian. Eleanor stared at it. "This is where he hid everything?" Victor nodded. "According to the journal." They approached cautiously. No signs of life appeared. No guards, no movement, nothing, which somehow felt worse. Adrian pushed open the main gate. The metal groaned loudly. The sound echoed across the valley. Then silence returned. The group entered. Dust covered everything. Years of abandonment hung in the air. Victor examined the journal. He mentioned a library. They searched room after room. Most were empty. Furniture covered by sheets. Fireplaces long cold. Portraits faded by time. Hours passed. Then Eleanor found it. The library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined every wall. Thousands of books. Ancient records. Ledgers, maps, documents. A lifetime of knowledge. Victor entered behind her. "This is it." Adrian frowned. "Where?" Victor walked toward the fireplace, then smiled. "There." At first, nobody understood. Then Victor pulled a specific book. A hidden mechanism clicked. The fireplace shifted. Stone scraped against stone. A secret doorway slowly opened. A secret doorway slowly opened. Everyone stared. Beyond the passage lay darkness. Cold, silent, waiting. Victor lit a lantern. The group descended. Narrow stone stairs spiraled underground. 20 steps. 30. 40. Finally they reached the bottom, and stopped, because the chamber beyond exceeded every expectation. Rows of locked cabinets, shelves filled with documents, boxes stacked floor to ceiling, enough evidence to expose hundreds of people, maybe thousands. Victor opened the nearest cabinet. His eyes widened. Financial records, political payments, secret contracts, everything. Years of corruption preserved perfectly. Charles Hart had done it. He had documented everything. Eleanor felt tears forming, not from sadness, from pride. Her father wasn't defeated. He wasn't forgotten. He fought until the very end, and somehow, he won. Then Victor found something else, a sealed metal box, unlike everything around it. The box carried a single note. For Eleanor. Her hands trembled. The handwriting belonged to her father. There was no doubt. She carefully opened the box. Inside rested a letter. Nothing else, just a letter. She unfolded it slowly and began reading. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then I failed to return home. First, know this. Nothing that happened was your fault. Not the poverty, not the lies, not the years we struggled. I would choose every hardship again, if it meant keeping you safe." Tears blurred her vision. The room disappeared. Only her father's words remained. "You were always the greatest thing in my life. Never let powerful people convince you that your worth comes from money, titles, or bloodlines. Your worth comes from who you choose to be." Eleanor wiped her eyes, then continued. "There is one final truth you must know. A truth I protected even from those closest to me. The circle believes they have one leader. They are wrong. The real leader has remained hidden for decades, even from them." Victor stepped forward. Adrian's pulse quickened. Eleanor kept reading. "The person responsible for everything. My ruin. The Duke's father's death. The disappearances. The murders. The thefts. All of it. Is someone the kingdom trusts completely? Someone nobody would ever suspect." The room fell silent. Eleanor turned the page. The final name waited there, written in her father's hand. She read it, then froze. The letter slipped from her fingers. Adrian caught it before it hit the floor. His eyes moved toward the name, then widened in horror. "No." Victor grabbed the letter. read the final line, and immediately stepped backward. The blood drained from his face, because the name wasn't merely shocking, it was impossible. Above them, somewhere inside the estate, a floorboard creaked. Everyone looked up. Someone else was in the house, someone who had followed them, someone who now knew they had discovered the truth, and if the name in Charles Hart's letter was correct, the most trusted person in the kingdom had been orchestrating every tragedy for 20 years. The hunt was over. The real war was about to begin. For several seconds, nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody breathed. Rain hammered the roof above them. The lantern flickered. The underground chamber suddenly felt smaller, dangerously small, because the name written at the bottom of Charles Hart's letter was not the name of a criminal, not the name of a politician, not the name of a business rival. It was the name of the most trusted man in the kingdom, Lord Chancellor Edward Sterling, the king's closest advisor, the architect of countless reforms, a national hero, a man celebrated in every province, a man children learned about in school, a man nobody would ever suspect. Victor stared at the letter, then read it again and again, hoping the words would change. They didn't. My God. Adrian felt sick. Sterling wasn't merely powerful, he was untouchable. Or at least everyone believed he was. Now they knew better. A floorboard creaked above them again. Everyone looked toward the stairs. Someone was definitely inside the estate. Victor extinguished the lantern immediately. Darkness swallowed the chamber. Only faint moonlight filtered through cracks in the stone ceiling. Footsteps echoed overhead. Slow, careful, searching. The intruder knew someone was here. The question was whether they knew exactly where. Adrian moved beside Eleanor, instinctively, protectively. The footsteps stopped. Silence followed. Then a voice. Familiar. Too familiar. You can come out now. Eleanor froze. Victor's eyes widened. Adrian immediately recognized the voice. No. The whisper escaped before he could stop it, because he knew exactly who was standing above them. Duchess Helena Blackthorne, his mother. The underground chamber fell silent. Eleanor stared at Adrian. Your mother followed us? Adrian looked genuinely horrified. No. The answer came instantly, because he knew something was wrong. His mother was many things. Manipulative, controlling, secretive. But she wasn't a murderer. She wasn't part of the circle, at least not willingly. The footsteps resumed, then stopped directly above them. Adrian. Helena's voice sounded different, fearful, urgent. Please answer me. Victor frowned. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Then they heard another sound. A struggle. A muffled cry. The sound of someone being restrained. Helena gasped, and suddenly everything became clear. She's not alone. Victor relit the lantern. Adrian rushed toward the stairs. The others followed. They emerged into the library moments later and found Helena kneeling on the floor, her hands bound, a pistol pressed against her head. The man holding the weapon smiled. Lord Chancellor Edward Sterling. The room froze. The kindly old statesman from every newspaper, every public ceremony, every royal event. He looked exactly the same, except for his eyes. Cold, empty, dangerous. The eyes of a man who had spent decades hiding his true face. Sterling smiled. Good evening. Nobody answered, because the truth was standing directly in front of them. The monster, the mastermind, the architect of 20 years of suffering. Sterling glanced toward Eleanor, then laughed softly. Charles Hart's daughter. Eleanor felt anger rising. Not fear. Not anymore. Anger. This man had stolen her father, destroyed her family, and nearly destroyed countless others. Sterling noticed. His smile widened. You have his eyes. Victor stepped forward. You murdered him. Sterling didn't deny it. He looked almost amused. As I recall, Charles murdered himself. The words ignited something inside Eleanor. No. Sterling raised an eyebrow. No? He died protecting people like you could never understand. The old man's smile faded. Slightly, only slightly, but enough. For the first time, she had struck a nerve. Sterling sighed. "You sound exactly like him." Then his pistol shifted, toward Eleanor. Instantly, Adrian moved. The gunshot exploded through the library. Everything happened at once. Helena screamed. Victor fired. Glass shattered. Books fell from shelves. Sterling stumbled backward. The bullet grazed Adrian's shoulder. Pain erupted through his arm. Yet he kept moving, because Eleanor stood directly behind him. The second shot never came. Victor's bullet struck Sterling's hand. The pistol flew across the room. Chaos erupted. Sterling ran. Not toward the exit, toward the upper floors. Victor cursed. "Don't let him escape." The chase began immediately. Hallways blurred. Stairs disappeared beneath pounding footsteps. Rain battered broken windows. Lightning flashed through dark corridors. Sterling moved surprisingly fast for his age. Because he had spent 20 years escaping consequences, he wasn't about to stop now. The pursuit reached the rooftop. Wind howled around them. Rain lashed their faces. The mountain valley stretched below. Dark, endless, dangerous. Sterling stood at the edge, trapped. For the first time, fear appeared in his eyes. Real fear, not fear of death, fear of exposure, because the evidence still existed, the truth still existed, and now everyone knew. Victor approached cautiously. "It's over." Sterling laughed. And the sound was almost sad. "You still don't understand." Nobody answered. Sterling looked toward the distant kingdom, the kingdom he had manipulated for decades. The circle was never about money. Victor frowned. Then what? Control. His voice hardened. "People beg for freedom." He laughed again. "But they crave control." Lightning illuminated the rooftop. Sterling looked suddenly old. Very old. A tired man carrying decades of secrets. Then, he looked directly at Eleanor. "Your father nearly won." The admission stunned everyone. Sterling smiled faintly. "He was the bravest man I ever met." For one brief moment, regret appeared, then vanished. Sterling stepped backward, toward the edge. Victor lunged. Too late. The Chancellor disappeared into darkness, gone. The valley swallowed him. Silence followed. Only wind remained. Only rain. Only the end of a nightmare. 6 weeks later, the kingdom changed forever. The evidence from Charles Hart's hidden estate shook every corner of society. Corrupt officials were arrested. Secret accounts were seized. Members of the circle disappeared into prison cells. Newspapers published revelations daily. For the first time in decades, people learned the truth. And at the center of it all stood a woman they once dismissed. Eleanor Hart, the servant's daughter, or so they thought. The inheritance claims were verified. Every document confirmed. Every record validated. Then her father's fortune was restored. His reputation was restored. His name was restored. More importantly, his legacy was restored. Meanwhile, Helena Blackthorne publicly admitted her role in Charles Hart's downfall. The confession shocked the nation, yet it earned something unexpected: respect. Not because people forgave her, because she finally accepted responsibility. And Adrian? He spent those 6 weeks helping rebuild everything his family helped destroy. Not because anyone ordered him to, because it was right. One autumn evening, another royal gathering filled the palace ballroom. The same chandeliers, the same orchestra, the same polished floor, yet everything felt different. Because tonight, Eleanor entered through the main doors, not as a guest, not as an outsider, not as someone seeking acceptance. She entered as herself. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. The entire room watched. History seemed to repeat itself. Except this time, nobody looked at her with pity. Nobody whispered. Nobody laughed. Respect replaced every expression. Across the ballroom, Adrian stood waiting. Their eyes met. A year earlier, he had broken her heart in this very room. Tonight, he intended to make something right. The crowd parted. Adrian crossed the ballroom, just as he had before. Only now there was no uncertainty, no manipulation, no hidden agenda. When he reached her, the room became completely silent. Everyone remembered, everyone waited, everyone wondered what he would say. Adrian smiled, then turned toward the crowd. His voice carried clearly through the ballroom. "I would like to introduce the most important woman in this room." Silence. Complete silence. Then he continued. "Eleanor Hart." His eyes never left hers. "Daughter of Charles Hart. A woman of extraordinary courage. A woman who survived humiliation without losing her dignity. A woman who chose truth when lies would have been easier. A woman who changed this kingdom." Many guests lowered their eyes, ashamed of how they once treated her. Adrian took another step forward. "And the woman I love." The ballroom exploded into applause. Not polite applause, real applause, earned applause, the kind people give when witnessing justice. Eleanor felt tears threatening again, very different tears this time. Not tears of shame, not tears of heartbreak, tears of healing. Adrian offered his hand. For one moment, she simply looked at it, remembering everything: the humiliation, the betrayal, the pain, the apologies, the truth, the journey. Then she smiled, a genuine smile, the first one that reached her eyes in a very long time, and placed her hand in his. The orchestra began playing. They stepped onto the dance floor. Together, at the edge of the ballroom, stood a portrait recently commissioned by the palace, not of a king, not of a duke, not of a hero. A portrait of Charles Hart, the man everyone once forgot, the man who refused to surrender, the man who gave his daughter the strength to stand when the world wanted her to kneel. As the music filled the ballroom, Eleanor glanced toward the portrait and quietly whispered, "We did it, Father." Somewhere beyond the chandeliers, beyond the music, beyond the kingdom he helped save, it almost felt like he was smiling. The story began with a man calling her nobody. It ended with an entire kingdom learning her name, and that made all the difference. Now I want to hear from you. If you were Eleanor, would you forgive Adrian after everything that happened, or would some wounds be too deep to heal? Share your answer below and tell me which country you're watching from. I read every single comment, and I love seeing where our viewers are joining from around the world. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next royal romance filled with secrets, betrayal, and unforgettable payback.